Welcome to Dynamic Leadership. This is the third installment on leadership development plans. Today, I'm going to connect the dots between what we know about progression and adaptation in sports and activities and how those same principles apply to small business leadership development. Let's start with a major area of breakdown in organizations, the traps that leaders and managers and employees fall into. Leaders often fall into two traps. The first is the efficiency bias. Rewarded in operations work. How do we get this done faster, cheaper, with fewer touch points? This keeps profit healthy. But it can also trap teams in an entropy cycle where what appears to be status quo is actually losing, because if the economy is growing at X% and you're staying even, you're actually going backwards. Now, no strategy lasts forever, and that's why I call that a trap. The second is the effectiveness bias. Rewarded in project and innovation work. Are we solving the right problem, designing the right play, building the right future? This drives revenue growth, but it can also lead to overanalysis or to making perfection the enemy of the good. And we've all seen it. The person working on the website over and over and over, when in today's environment, the best thing we can do is get it out there and test it and get real world information. Sometimes it makes perfection the enemy of the good, and even worse, it can make it the enemy of great. Now, neither bias is wrong. Efficiency or effectiveness is more about sequencing. Both are necessary. The real leadership skill is the sequencing of effectiveness first. When you're designing, clarity, alignment, and purpose, though that's a priority. Then lean into efficiency. When you're executing, speed, standardization, and optimization are the priorities. So it's effectiveness first, then efficiency, and you can cycle through those. It's not like be effective first until it's perfectly effective. It's a process of doing both. Now, this tension is often amplified by personality differences. Research on Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, shows that the greatest breakdowns in organizations often come between N's and S's. Strong N's, the intuitor, effectiveness learning intuitives, can over-index on vision and strategy. The risk is ideation inflation. Lots of ideas, little execution. Strong S's, efficiency learning sensors. These folks can over-index on process and proof. The risk is operational inertia. The system resists change even when the market is moving at lightning speed. Now, if unchecked, the result is confirmation bias, stuck thinking, and group think that reinforces whichever voice dominates. This is why Jim Collins in Good to Great emphasizes confronting the brutal facts, and why Liz Weissman in Multipliers highlights the power of leaders who draw out intelligence across the team. She talks about multipliers versus diminishers. Now, to make this work, owners and decision makers must design systems and frameworks, cross-functional teams, and review processes that drive adaptation. These ensure both voices get airtime. High-performing disciplines have natural contexts for growth. Sports teams, they play games every week, sometimes several in a week. Each game creates urgency and focuses on skill building and skill refinement. Skiers, track drivers, surfers, hikers, they all progress through skill levels that ensure both mastery and safety. Martial arts schools, they use belts and testing. Students always know the next challenge. They train for it, and that training compounds progress eventually into mastery. Businesses don't have this built in. They default to operations, and that worked better 50 years ago in a manufacturing economy where major changes were infrequent. But today, in a constantly shifting environment, businesses must cycle between effectiveness and efficiency much more often. Without that rhythm, they stall or fall into reactive mode. Large companies have some protection, redundancy, brand momentum, loyal customers, but the silos of big companies, while sometimes useful, they also make it harder for new initiatives to take root. Change management is a lot harder because you have more habits that are in place. That habit becomes culture. Small businesses don't have those luxuries. They need consistent, deliberate action to keep moving forward. The solution is continuous improvement. Through initiatives, deliberate, time-bound challenges that stretch the organization. For example, every 6 months, launch an initiative that solves a real problem. Sometimes it's an effectiveness problem, turning an opportunity into results. Sometimes it's an efficiency problem, executing faster, simpler, or plugging holes. Sometimes it's a market or service problem. The Ansoff matrix shows that growth happens in two main ways: selling new products to existing customers, selling existing products to new customers. That hasn't changed. Whether you're talking about having an ascension ladder, you may call it a value ladder. The point is, if you don't give the customer the next thing that they want, they're likely to go someplace else. Alternating between the two, markets and services, keeps both markets and services expanding. Today, with modern tools, skunkworks and rapid testing, real-world feedback, these are all easily within reach. Validation can happen in days, not months. Dynamic leadership supports this kind of action because it creates a natural flow, communication up and down the organization. This enables early identification of market or structural shifts, and each new initiative becomes the context for additional development, just like weekly games in sports or the next belt in martial arts. Now, this keeps development prescriptive and relevant. There isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Not all businesses or cycles are equal. But one thing is certain: what was once good enough will not remain so for long. Now, last week I introduced the idea of allostasis, how consistently increasing demand builds capacity for growth on an ongoing basis. We talked about having literally 2-year development plans in such a way that you stay in that flow zone and keep the demand increasing, and you keep the adaptation increasing right along with it. By contrast, homeostasis gravitates towards status quo. And as I already mentioned, status quo in the business world, that actually means you're going backwards because growth is continuing. Adapting only to keep things the same is what you end up with. As I said, in business, you go backwards. The simple example would be if you're renting your space, that's probably going to go up. Your utility bill will probably go up. These things are going up. But that's not even including the competition and other opportunities that are coming along. Now, high adaptation gets built in when you proactively pursue initiatives that strengthen your organization's position in the marketplace. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about innovation for the sake of innovating. I'm talking about innovation to stay ahead of the curve. And I'll give you some examples when I get to the pad. This brings me to the point of innovation. Too often people talk about it as if it's a lightning strike. In dynamic leadership, innovation is the natural byproduct of running initiatives through adaptive cycles. Think of it as a 4-point innovative cycle: the initiative, development of individual capabilities, organizational and individual adaptation, and then context for innovation. So to wrap up, for sports teams, games provide context. For martial artists, belts provide sequence. For businesses, initiatives create the rhythm of continuous improvement that keeps leadership development and innovation alive. In the VUCA world, stability doesn't come from waiting. It comes from adapting, not for the sake of change, but to proactively meet the challenges ahead. Now, this aligns with Jim Collins' principle of being simple, methodical, and consistent from his book, Great by Choice. The key difference is recognizing that the environment is never standing still. Owners set the initiative as the next logical step toward their vision or the company's vision. Leaders translate and organize the work. Leaders also connect it to what matters for employees and stakeholders. The result is a business that shifts from random reaction to deliberate progression. And every time you run the cycle, your baseline rises. Profit grows, revenue grows, innovation compounds. And this gives you that profitable growth cycle that you want. The business becomes anti-fragile in the process. That is the essence of leadership development. So we'll get into some examples, and then next week I'll go through and use real-world examples and go through a project design sheet that you can use with any size initiative in your company. I mentioned that initiative cycle. So we have initiative at the top. And this initiative, again, I want to separate the idea of innovation versus having initiatives that actually do something on purpose. So let's say a person has a vision for their business, and I don't know if you're familiar with value ladder or ascension ladder, but essentially you have your low barrier to entry items, and then that builds your customer base, and then you have a second tier that they can go up to, and then a third tier, and then a fourth tier. So in a doctor's office, a checkup can lead to having a patient, and a patient can lead to additional treatment, and later on it might lead to things like surgery or other care. And then you also have widening where you can get the family members. So you'll need to have initiatives. Going back to the doctor's office, you will have additional services that you provide over time. You may not be providing them as the doctor, but you could bring other doctors into your operation that provide that service. You can also do it with affiliates. You can do it with partnerships and things like that. So the initiative is, obviously, if we're here today, we are not where we ultimately will be in our vision. And so there are steps that we have to take to get to that vision. Left on its own, we're not going to get there, right? We'll just keep churning and spinning and reacting. But if you think about it in terms of we're here and the vision is here, there's a natural progression that goes this way. When you look at it that way, you can see it's not innovation for the sake of innovating. It's that you're not going to start here from day one. You have to build, and you have to build, and you have to build. And these are your development opportunities. After initiative, we have the development, and this is individual capabilities. I use the word capabilities because I like to think of it as you are creating capabilities across your team members, right? New skills, but being able to use those new skills. It's one thing to go to class and learn something. It's another thing to go to class and learn to apply it and then actually use it and get results from it. And this is what we think about in the context of development. If you're talking about development, what we're doing is building individual capabilities. Those individual capabilities come together to create organization capabilities. And the organization capabilities, that's how you go from here to here. Because in reality, if you look at it, these are probably not horizontal. They might be going slightly upward. They might be going slightly upward, but they also might be going slightly downward. And you're going to have KPIs, et cetera, to know when is the best time to make this next shift. I said 6 months in the introduction. It may be every 3 or 4 months, but you're going to have you're going to fall into some sort of a rhythm, because while you're doing this build of the next initiative, and that's like a sub project, as you're doing that, you're going to find things that you want to do, but they're out of scope. You don't want to cram it into this initiative because you'll end up with delays, et cetera. It's called scope creep. So as long as you always know that you have another initiative, these things that are out of scope for that one, you are already building your next one. This is a very important concept to get, because too often people get locked into this one project and they start getting so focused on it, like operations, and it's got to keep going and going, when in reality, it's a stepping stone to the next thing. There may be a lot of similarities, but the point is you have another one coming, and another one coming after that, and another one coming after that. So this is what we're talking about. This is not going to happen on its own. We have to be intentional, looking forward as the leader. So as the leader, you're looking forward to see what skills are going to need here, and you start looking at developing them here. This is why a 2-year development plan makes more sense. If you're not looking forward, it's going to be difficult to create the context and the urgency around the development plan. And I'll give you some examples that you can sink your teeth into, and then we'll walk through an example of comparisons in the sports world, which we're very comfortable with applying this approach, versus the business world. And then we have context for the next innovation. Now, if you look at it as simply as the next logical step towards the vision, along with the Ansoff matrix, where you have products or services and you have markets. You're going up new products to the same market, and then you take new markets to existing products, and we keep going back and forth, and you're moving this upward. So it's new markets and new products, but you don't do it together. You do one and then you do the other. You go back and forth. Looking at the auto manufacturers, I think they provide a good example. If you look at, I'll use Mercedes-Benz as an example. If you notice, and you go back years and years, the E-Class and the S-Class, the size stayed roughly the same for decades. If you look at BMW, same thing with the 5 Series and the 7 Series. They stayed roughly the same. But when you go down a step, you notice that the 3 Series got larger. And in the case of the Mercedes, the C-Class got larger. Now, there's different reasons for that to happen. And I've noticed that if you look at car manufacturers, car brands, seems to be a consistent trend, certainly for American manufacturers, where the cars just keep getting larger and larger and larger. And part of it is because families grow and they need more space. And just like people can become loyal to a brand, they can become loyal to a model. And as that family grows, they want more space, and that feeds into the focus groups, gives feedback. They want, next thing you know, you have a Mustang that went from a nice compact car to something that's kind of large. The reason I brought up the Mercedes and the BMW is because of the E-Class and the S-Class, in the case of the Mercedes, and the 5 Series and 7 Series, that is about the right size if you think about it. I mean, that is the right size for a luxury car, and it's the right size for a luxury sedan, right, in the case of the 5 Series or the E-Series. But the ones underneath that, they keep getting larger and larger, and then, so you can imagine the person from the 3 Series to stay in BMW, they go into the 5. And in the case of the Mercedes, they go from the C and they go into the E. I'm using that as just an example because it gets to this constantly moving up. But there's something else that you can see with the automotive industry. Whether you're looking at Honda, they came out with Acura. You look at Toyota, they came out with Lexus. You look at Nissan, they came out with Infiniti. If they didn't do that, this is like the value ladder. If they didn't do that, they would lose market share to the companies that did. So each of those organizations came out with another brand because that person who's looking who owned a Nissan and they're looking at BMW or Mercedes, they're not going to buy a Nissan if they're thinking about the Mercedes. So by putting in Infiniti, having a luxury brand, or in the case of Toyota, Lexus, or the Acura, they brought in another brand that could compete with those other brands. However, there's something else that we don't want to lose sight of. You may be familiar with Ray Dalio, and I'm sometimes reluctant to talk about this because I don't want to sound like fear-mongering. But the reality is there are economic cycles. And he, in his book, The Changing World Order, he talks about how we go from the New World Order happens, and this is about an 80-year cycle. And the United States, so depending on what country you're in, you may or may not be directly impacted by this. After World War II, the United States replaced Great Britain. The US dollar took over as the world reserve currency from the British pound. Without getting into the conversation about who is coming up as the US is going down, because we don't know what's going to happen. This thing can turn around. You're going to have to get some political alignment to make that happen. But right now, we are in this area here. And the reason I pull this slide up now is because the other thing that was going on during this period of time is the baby boomers. So you think people born from 1944 to about 1965, that group was a massively expanding demographic. And so there was the need for more people buying cars. There was a lot of tension for housing and cars during this cycle. And my point is, you don't want to look at Honda going to Acura and Toyota adding Lexus in a vacuum. You have to look at it in the context of what was going on demographically with the baby boomers expanding. So there was a need for more cars, period, right? Because there were more people, more houses, more cars. It had the baby boom moving through from when they were starting to hit their early 20s, so like the early 60s, early to mid 60s, all the way through to just recently when the peak of the baby boom turned 60 years old 5 years ago. So let's say right now the peak of the baby boom is about 65. So that had a major effect on everything: workplace, housing, cars, etc. It's important because some of the processes that worked in the past are not going to work in the future, right? Because when you have this thing that's constantly growing, all you have to do is show up. You don't have to innovate. So hey, that's the way we've always done it, that works fine. It's if it's not broken, don't fix it. That works when all you have to do is show up. It's no longer that way. This is the rise and fall of a country. And it tracks along with the Chinese dynasties from centuries. This has been going on for centuries and centuries, whether it's dynasties within the country of China or the countries globally. So you had the US replace Great Britain, you had Great Britain replace the Dutch, and they all follow. This is Ray Dalio, not me saying this. You can look at the book Changing World Order, and he wrote that book around 2021 or so. And at that time, we were in around this area here, 12. So having wealth gaps, losing competitiveness, having the wealth gaps. Late stage 4 and early stage 5 in the decline is what he was saying. Now we're clearly in the decline. We are clearly in stage 5 decline. The next one is stage 6. There will be a new country that comes up, or the US will figure out how to turn it around. In the context of this, if you think you can go from where we are over the next few years through this shift without doing some innovation, without having some initiatives to keep pace, whether you are in the United States in the decline or you're in another country that's going to benefit from whichever country is rising, it's going to take initiatives. There are going to be changes. You can't get away from that. This is the 6 stages. So you have new internal order and leadership, right? Obviously, that was in the 40s and 50s. Resource allocation, systems built and refined. And this just so happened to coincide with the baby boom. So the U.S. had a double wave. We had a double wave for the U.S. We had the baby boom rising during this time, and we had the New World Order economic cycle happening. So it was like on steroids. Peace and prosperity, you couldn't do wrong. There were so many people going through there. If you just showed up, you were going to probably do okay. Then we go through this period here, which is now your Gen Zs, your millennials are coming into the workplace. So if you overlay this with the demographic curve, you'll get the idea. The excesses and widening gaps happening. So this right here would be the late stage 4, where we were just exiting in the early 20s, and now we're 25. Bad financial conditions, intense conflicts. And he talks about different kinds of wars: trade wars, capital wars. You have technology wars, geopolitical wars, and of course, military wars. So there's different kinds of wars going on that don't necessarily look like what you would expect. And even with the military wars, when you look at drone warfare, everything is changing so fast. But if we are here, the momentum is going this way. It's hard to think that we're not going to have VUCA going on for the next several years. And it's not just the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's that it's pushing against us. It's that it's a headwind. It's one thing to have VUCA as a tailwind like we had here. It's another thing to have VUCA as a headwind. So again, I'm not doing any fear mongering. We're going to get through this. We always have. One of the things I did is I looked at the headlines that were in Great Britain as they were going down here. And they came through it fine. Sure, there were some tensions. You notice some brands got bought by other companies. But the bottom line is they did okay. And so I don't want to do the fear mongering thing. The point is we've got to be proactive, or you're going to be reacting. And because human nature is what it is, and 95% of everything we do is done by habit, I would say there's probably a lot of people going on the reactive side. I don't want to be in that group. That's what I want to say there. Now, to get back to the development plan conversation, that was like context for why we want to be paying attention to this. So I mentioned martial arts. I don't want to go too far down that path of martial arts, but it just creates a nice map. So this is something I would do more in a one-on-one conversation. By looking at it this way, hopefully you can kind of see that it's not that far-fetched to have a development plan. So white belt skills, basic stances, punches, front kick, low block. If you can use your imagination if you're not familiar with martial arts. This goes with special ops. It goes with military. You have basic training, then you have advanced training, then you have the advanced schools. It's the same principle that's used regardless of what you're doing. You can apply this to surfing or skiing. There's something in the background that's going through these skills that you need to have, and they build on each other. I put it side by side with the Shaolin Kung Fu, because this is thought to be more of emotional and cognitive and consciousness, but you still have the same set of skills and cognitive, emotional, consciousness, right? And then the next level skills, and then this one here, same thing. So on the karate side, I use Taekwondo because it's popular in the U.S. It certainly was popular in the past few decades. And then you have the advanced student. So you're going to be fighting, then you'll have weapons. You bring in combinations of kicks, but they all build on each other. And you could think of this the same way with leadership development. That's why I'm using this as an example, so people can get some ideas that you're looking for mastery, and it's not just something that we're going to debate. It's based on best practices. And I use Good to Great by Jim Collins, Great by Choice, Jim Collins, and multipliers. Why? Because those are the closest to principles that we can get when it comes to leadership, in my opinion, because of the extensive research that was done. Now, you can't call them pure principles because obviously there's nuance, but there's nothing out there that's done that much research that I know of as those works. And that's where you start with as your foundation. I also use Proverbs in the Bible because Proverbs I look at those as principles as well. And when you look at, so you don't have to make up what does it look like to be advanced or to be a master. You have examples that are there. And then this is what it looks like for business. You can see the stage is beginner. The next one will say novice. Then you have individual contributor. You have the business analyst, and you can put a different name in there. But again, it's to give you, this is not to say this is how it's done. This is to give you ideas of how it might look in your organization. Not losing sight of what we talked about earlier, that you have some vision out here, whether you think about it or not. If you don't have a vision, that's a vision too, right? But you have some vision out here, some target out here. And when you look at it in the context of that, there's a natural progression that comes out of that. So we don't do this in a vacuum. We do it in the context of your vision. So this would be the beginner. Take a screenshot. And then this one would be the novice. And how you develop these skills, that's a conversation you can have. You can use mentoring. You can use a course. You can use hands-on training. There's a variety of things that you can do. It depends on what it is. And as you move up towards leader, it's not so much learning it as it is doing it, experiencing it. It might be traveling and having conversations with customers around the country, around the world. It might be leading a major change in the organization or a major capability. Those would be skills that get developed through the action or through the process of doing. Again, this is not one size fits all. It's as much art as it is science. And I think this is why dynamic leadership doesn't get a lot of press, because it is more prescriptive. It's based on it's more based on the situation. But every business has these factors that they need to think about. So then you have intermediate, you take a screenshot. Advanced. And if I'm teaching someone to ski or snowboard, I used to teach performance driving on the track. And if I'm teaching somebody those skills, I have this in my mind. There's certain things that they have to be able to do before I'm comfortable with them taking it up a notch. They've got to be able to track out, for example, coming out of the turn if it's a rear-wheel drive car. They have to be able to get through a turn without lifting. They've got to be progressive with the gas so they don't have to lift, because it's so easy to spin if you do that. And just as an example. But these are things I'm watching for in that learning process. And You don't really want them going to that next level until they can do the skills at the first one. Same thing with skiing. You're not going to take somebody up to a double black diamond right off the bat. So you got the initiative, you have the development of individual capabilities, then you have the development of the organization abilities, and then you have context for innovation. And this becomes a process that you just continue going around and around and around. I wanted to show this slide, a 7-step formula for innovation, right? Frame the initiative. Owner defines a clear challenge aligned with the vision. It comes back to the vision. Translate to development plan. Senior leaders identify sub-projects and related skills. Engage the front line, show why it matters, enroll them. Start the change management connected to what employees already value. You drive action, organize the work considering interests and strength. Progress builds clarity faster than waiting for readiness. I like to say it's easier to act yourself into a new way of feeling than to feel yourself into a new way of acting. And if you haven't looked at the part 2 episode, we talked a lot about adaptation and how allostasis, which is a corollary to homeostasis. So the body, the central nervous system, is predicting how much demand is coming. And when it comes up short, it throws in more neurotransmitter, which makes the signal stronger. And the more neurotransmitters, you can go back and watch the video. But with that comes more dopamine, and dopamine is like a signal amplifier. This is why you can do different things when you're lifting weights. You can do different things and you get like a burst of strength, or you can lift more than you were thinking you should be able to lift. When you get enough dopamine coming in, you actually have a stronger signal. And lifting is 2 parts. Everything is 2 parts. It's the muscle and it's the neurotransmitter signal or the neural signal. So getting the neural pathway signal strong is important. Strength and capacity. This is the adaptation, stretch, support, recalibrate. Each cycle raises the baseline and you just keep going higher and higher and higher. Implement and measure, turn new capabilities into results, serving customers, generating revenue, and of course, increasing profit for profitable growth. And then design the next initiative, capture ideas and lessons, and shape the next challenge. It's a natural way to address scope creep. I wanted to kind of start drawing some parallels and make it make sense for you so you can look at it in a way that you have context for why this is important. Things are not going to go back to the way that they were. I don't care if you're in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. The change of a changing world order is going to impact every country, not just the 2 big players. So there you go. Next week, we'll talk about making this real. So ideally, if you have an initiative that you're planning, I recommend bringing it and we'll work through that using a form that I'll make available to you. All right, we'll see you next week.